Guys, welcome back to another episode of Rennch. On today's show, we are going back to work on what very well may be the rustiest Porsche 911 in the world. Welcome to what I call Rustmageddon, which is the rustiest 911 I've ever seen. Now, if you recall, I started working on this thing like a year ago, and I did the entire passenger side, rockers, the inner rear quarter panels, and I wanted to get back to work on this thing. I don't really have the space to do the stuff I need to do, which is a lot of stuff on the front end and underneath the car, but I thought it would tackle something that's relatively straightforward, and that is the rusty seat bucket. So thanks to Restoration Design, the world's best panel people, we have all the panels we need to make this thing into a car again. And I started the process yesterday of tackling the very rusty driver's side rear seat pan. And that's this piece here. Let me really quickly take you through the process that I've already done. And that is, first and foremost, as usual, looking at the replacement panel and seeing how it fits on the car and where to cut. I'm a huge proponent of leaving as much factory metal as I can. I don't want to replace any factory good Porsche sheet metal with aftermarket if I can help it. So I generally try to make the smallest patch panel possible and do it where it makes the most sense. It won't always make sense to do that. I basically cut this whole large panel down into what I consider the necessary part of this. To begin with, I cut the really rusty, bad stuff out. I basically fitted it to where I needed to. Obviously, I cut a lot oversized on the replacement panel. And then I fit it to the car. I drilled it in with self-tapping screws. And now I have at least a pretty good general idea of how big this panel is going to be. My next steps are, I'm going to use one of my little cool air tools to punch out holes in this lip. I'm going to trim this thing down to size, and then I'm going to try to do my best to cut and butt, or cut and butt, as Fitzy says, this piece by laying it where it's supposed to be and then cutting through both layers of metal and then starting to tack this piece in. I may not get to do that the way I hope. I may end up having to do this front lip and weld this thing in first and then do the rest, but I'm not sure yet until I get in there. Nevertheless, here's where we are. I'm at the stage now where I can start prepping this piece for its final install and looking forward to welding this thing up and having a lovely finished panel. So you can see that I have prepped the area already. I really love the Steel It product for something like this. You can see that this is what I've already replaced. This entire section had to be replaced. Obviously there's no floors yet. The floors have been all drilled out, but this actually enables me to get in here and work really well. I had to replace a panel here, and now this is what I'm left over, obviously. So what I'm going to do here is get all this stuff prepped the rest of the way, cut my replacement panel down a little bit, and start the process of matching this lip, which is the most important piece, is to keep this thing really nice and consistent. That is my first task, is to make sure that this thing fits really well. And to do that, I'll probably end up cutting through both pieces and line it up, put a couple of tacks in there, and then I can start focusing on the rest of this bucket. Okay, as is the case with most patch panels, you've got to pick a reference point and try to nail that reference point, and then everything else can follow it. In this case, what I've done is I've notched out this area here and given myself a little bit of wiggle room on this lip This lip is a little wonky. I have to straighten it out a little. So what it does is it enables me now to make a really nice tight seal here so that this line is continuous and really smooth, and then obviously connects to this end. So what I'll do now is a couple things. I'm going to trim this up a little bit because this is overlapping by about 1 inch now, and I just want to cut this area down. There's some spot welds that I want to get rid of because I'm going to be spot welding this. And for that, all I'm going to do is actually just take my grinder and I'm just going to hit this corner until they get really, really thin. That way I'm not worried about overlapping this piece on top as I cut around the body to get a nice flush fit and basically cut and butt this whole area. So what I'm going to do now really quick is I'm just going to clean up this lip a little with a little hammer and dolly and just make sure it's nice and smooth. And then I'll get my welder together and outside here so I can start tacking this thing together. All right, after a couple of hours of fiddling and finagling, I will say that if you're doing any kind of patch panel like this and you get to this point, it's fitted, the surfaces are flush, really you've done the majority of the heavy lifting. Like you're really kind of home, I want to say you're home free, but you're pretty much home free. You know, as I go through here, all I do is continue to feel and make sure that the surfaces are equal. Like right here, I've got a bit of a lip, but it's nothing that a few taps of a hammer can't fix. You'll also notice there's kind of a big gap here, and I'll show you guys how I'm going to fix that momentarily. I have not yet done the plug welds along the side, as they are kind of the most straightforward part of this whole thing. As I showed you before, this is really the issue, is making sure that this line is correct, and I think it's going to be great. It looks really flush to me. It's a little teeny bit proud right here, but by the time I get it weld in there and smooth it over, I think you're gonna not notice it at all, especially if we decide to put a little more texture on this floor, but I'm not exactly sure what my buddy wants to do with that. So what I do now is I'm probably gonna hit it really quickly with a grinding wheel and just do kind of an initial pass, and then I'll work on some hammer and dolly on it, and you know, again, try to get it as flush as I can. Because it's not like a door panel or something on the outside, I don't feel that much of an issue with going around the outside. That being said, I still will probably, you know, tack it in back and forth in certain spots so I don't get too much warping if possible. Okay, a couple minutes of grinding and I'm ready. This is all perfect. This is all pretty perfect. A little bit loose here, but nothing, a couple of taps. I may end up having to break this one just so I can get this a little more flush, but I'm gonna take the wins as I get them. So if I have a nice gap, I'm just gonna weld it. Okay, gents, here we are. And I've got pretty solid weld bead all around there, and then down there, and then on this side, I have this big gap. So, you got a couple different options when you have a really big gap like this. You can kind of do what I did, which is to start welding on one and just kind of keep your bead going until you connect with the top, and then make a little bridge. But here is a little secret stash. This is a TIG welding rod, and what I like to do here is you can get that rod right down in the gap, and then you can weld over it. And that gives you a nice amount of filler to fill in these spots. You can literally also use a coat hanger, and that works, you know, pretty much just as well. But let me show you really quick. I'll just lay this in here just like this. I kind of put the tip on the edge and I'm pushing it down so it's flush like that. And let me throw a little bead in here real quick. So there we go. It just welds it right up without too much trouble. You can obviously clean this up, which is what I'm going to do right now. All right, we are solidly welded in. I now have a date with a grinder. I've just gotten this new wheel made by a company called Walter. And it gives me a nice flat disc for the flat parts. And then I can go back to a flat disc for this inner rounded part. So give me 30 minutes and I'll be back. All right, like I said, about 30 minutes later, and we are really close. So I've got some decisions to make, and that is I've got a few holes here that I can try to weld up, and I probably will. But you got to be really careful because this stuff gets really, really thin after you grind it. So I don't think there's any choice other than to do it with that TIG welding rod and really try to not blow through. But it's really just here and there. I really like how this front turned out. It's almost perfect. I've got a little bit of undercut here, and I can put a little weld bead there and grind it, and it should be perfect. I got a little bit of undercut here as well. But you do have to consider, is this going to get a little bit of undercoating on it? And if it does, all of this is just going to disappear with no issue whatsoever. I will probably weld up these holes, but I'm feeling right here, this is really thin. Like this is like wafer thin metal right here after the grind. So I've got to be really careful because this could quickly turn into a gigantic hole. And yeah, I don't want that. I want to not have a gigantic hole there. All right, well, as I thought, any attempt to try to close some of these holes, it just burnt right through and it was terrible. So I'm gonna seal it with some Pour 15 or some Steel It and make sure it's seam sealed on each side, and that should do it. But I did really get a nice cleanup and a nice grind, and I'm gonna call this a job done. This is a nice solid seat now, and we are on to the next project on Rustmageddon. Okay, well, first of all, I'm well aware that I look like a coal miner right now. I'm very, very dirty. I thought I'd give you guys a few stats. That probably took, let's see, I've got about 6 hours into it today, and I think I put 2 hours into it yesterday. So 8 total hours for that replacement. It's not terrible, but it's a day. You know, if I were charging for this, it'd be $1,000 probably, something like that, between materials and time and all that kind of stuff. So if you guys ever need your seat pan replaced and they say it's gonna be $1,000, don't be surprised. A couple tools of the trade. I really like these Benchmark abrasives flap discs. These are 40 grit, but the star of the day is this Walter sanding disc that you can put on a 4.5 inch angle grinder. This thing just rips. This thing rips right through welds. This is a 40 grit disc. I actually have a 25 or a 30 grit as well. I mean, it just rips that top layer off. You got to be very careful and not just like dig in, because it'll literally cut right through the metal, and you got to kind of go back and forth. But this is killer. Like, if you want to save yourself tons of time, and I really like how flat this can get. And then finally, a 1/4 inch air angle grinder. Like, this is the perfect finishing tool. So really, these three things, you can have 2 angle grinders and this thing, and really do pretty much everything you need to do to get this thing nice and flat and looking nice. So I want you guys to stay tuned, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. This car needs so much work, and if you guys are interested in learning a little more about how to replace panels and, you know, try to bring a car like this back from the dead, then you should subscribe, because that is something we're going to be focusing on for the next month or two. I'm hoping to be able to get all of the rust work done on this thing so that it can get to paint and turn into a car once again. So that's it for today. Thank you guys, as always, for watching. You keep on rocking. We'll talk to you soon.